How's it going? Chuck here with QuietKat, here today to talk to you about the front and rear fenders and how to install them on your bike. We'll start with the front fender. The front fender is pretty simple to install. When you receive it, it'll come in a little plastic bag and it's going to come with a spacer already included. That spacer works great for the traditional forks. If you have an inverted fork, like the one on this Apex here, you're going to need a second spacer. So we'll slide that second spacer right on top of that front fender. Now I'm ready to put the front fender into the bike. The front fender is pretty simple to install. If you look at your front fork, underneath the crown of the fork where the steer tube is, it's hollow. That's where this piece of the front fender is going to go. So if I take my front fender, I'm going to line it up with this shorter part that's a little bit higher towards the front and this little bit longer, a little bit lower piece towards the rear. I can slide this right through the fork and I'm going to push it up into the frame. Then I can go ahead and turn that wing nut to the right, and that little piece there is going to expand out and clamp onto the inside of the fork. If I've got it pretty snug, doesn't need to be overly tight, but that will hold the front fender in place. You can adjust it a little bit so it's straight, and now you're good to go. Quick tip with the front fender. When you have the front fender installed on your bike, it does make it a little bit more difficult to remove the battery. So if you want to remove the battery, it's best to remove the front fender. Thankfully, this is really easy. All I need to do is just loosen that wing nut underneath the fork. That will allow me to slide that front fender right out of the bike. Then I can go ahead and easily remove the battery if I need to charge it. Let's move on to installing the rear fender. The rear fender you'll see comes like this. It also comes with a hardware kit with a few bolts, nuts, and washers. And we'll walk through how to install this fender on the bike. We'll set this aside for now. The first thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and remove the rear wheel from the bike. I know it's tempting to try to install the fender with the wheel on the bike, but it makes it harder and you're going to save yourself some time if you just take the wheel off and get yourself easier access to the frame. So we'll go ahead and remove the rear wheel from this Apex. If that's a little tricky for you, feel free to reference our videos on how to take both the front and rear wheels off of our bikes. Once we have the rear wheel removed from your bike, you will gain access to the frame. And you can see inside of the frame here that it's already set up with a couple of holes. We can grab our rear fender and you'll notice that it's drilled out for a couple different attachment points. So you'll notice that there's a hole close to the bottom on this side and no hole down here. That hole we want to go ahead and line up with the frame right there. So this fender is going to set into the frame just like so. For the first bolt closest to the seat tube frame, you're going to need the shorter bolt and a washer. We'll go ahead and put the washer right through the bolt, get ourselves lined up. I'm going to place this fender in right about the correct spot, and I'm going to take that little bolt, line it up, and just start the threads there a little bit. Just kind of snug it on there with my fingers for now, still letting it move freely. I can kind of carefully rest it aside there, and I'll get ready to install the second bolt. The second bolt has a few more pieces to it. We have a long bolt, two washers, a spacer, and a nut. So we're going to start with a long bolt. We're going to drop that into the top of the frame, and you'll see it slide right through the frame. Next, we're going to go in and we're going to take this spacer and a washer, and I want that spacer to go in first, the washer to go in second, and I'm going to have that washer sit right against the fender. You may need a little help from a friend, but it's a lot to hold on to start. I'm going to then put a washer on the underside, and finally I'm going to put that lock nut on the bottom. See if I can start it here and get it finger tight. There we go. Once you have both bolts kind of lined up into the frame and started in there, we're ready to tighten things down. To tighten down the rear fender, you're going to need a 4mm Allen key and an 8mm wrench. If you don't have an 8mm wrench, that's okay. You can use a small crescent wrench just the same. I'm going to start with this long bolt here towards the back. I'm going to put my 8mm wrench on the bottom over that lock nut, and I'm going to put my 4mm wrench onto the top. Once I've got it lined up, I can start to tighten this down. Perfect. So as we get close here, we're going to get it pretty snug, not all the way tight, but pretty close. Nice. So I've got that larger bolt towards the rear, pretty snug, still a little bit of movement there. I just want to make sure I have a little bit of room to adjust things into place. I'm going to take my 4mm wrench and come back into this other bolt here. Make sure things are pretty lined up and square. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that bolt down with the frame pretty snug. Again, don't need to over tighten it, but just get it pretty tight so it's not going to bounce loose. Then I'll come back to this larger bolt. I'll put my wrench on that 8mm lock nut, my 4mm Allen key on the top, and I will tighten this right down. Again, pretty snug, don't over tighten it. So it's as simple as that. Once these bolts are tight, this fender is locked in place. You can see it's pretty solid with the frame. Your fender is installed, and all you need to do is put that rear wheel back in the bike. Feel free to reference our videos on how to install both the front and rear wheels on the bike if you need a little help getting that rear wheel back in the frame. Once you have the rear wheel installed back on the bicycle, just give it a couple spins. Just kind of check and make sure that you've got plenty of clearance between your tire and the fender, that nothing's stuck, nothing's binding, and you'll be good to take it out on the trail. That's a wrap for the fender install video. Feel free to check out more resources on QuietKat.com, and we'll see you out on the trail.